citizen to run for high office. So I don't think I'm telling you something that you haven't thought about before, but what I thought would be helpful for me to do is to inform you of some of the actual law about it, because I think there's some confusion about what the law is, how we've gotten to this point, and what we can do to solve it, and just tell you what some of the proposals are out there, and then we can talk about ways in which we can get involved on that, okay? So the first thing I just want to say to all of you is I suspect, I could be wrong, but I've talked to I spent a lot of time talking to activists of different type all over the place, is if I ask you, well, what's the biggest problem? A lot of people would say Citizens United. That's what most people would say. That's usually the catch-all phrase that people use to say what the problem is, why we're in this mess. And I'm going to tell you, as a lawyer, it is not Citizens United. Citizens United is not the problem. There has been a Supreme Court case. There was a Supreme Court case back in the 70s, back in the Nixon era, called Buckley versus Vallejo. And that decision said that if you're a rich person, whether it's Rauner or JB or Bill Gates, and you want to spend $1 billion on a race, you can do that. And there's no way for the government to restrict it. And the argument there that the Supreme Court accepted was essentially that you're a private citizen, you can spend your money talking about anything you want. And the government can't regulate it because of the First Amendment. For better or for worse, that's the law, and it's been the law since that time. And what's more, forget running. Let's say you're JB or Bruce Rauner or Bill Gates or the Koch brothers. If you want, you can spend an unlimited amount of money talking about any message that you want. It's called an independent expenditure. So if I'm worth $1 billion and I decide I want to spend every penny just trashing Elizabeth Warren or Donald Trump, I can spend my money doing that. It's a, quote, free country, unquote. And what that means, though, the problem with that is it makes it really hard to regulate campaign finance, right? Because no matter how, let's say they cap contributions to the candidate at $1,000, $500, $10,000, it doesn't mean a heck of a lot if a billionaire can enter the race and spend an unlimited amount of money. Okay? That is the core problem with our campaign finance system. It's a problem that's created by the courts, and it's a problem that's been around for a long time. So you might be asking, well, I don't remember it being quite so bad in the 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s. I will tell you, it has always been a problem. This is not a new problem. Citizens United made it more of a problem because it essentially said that corporations could do the same thing. Now that's a problem, but what it means is that instead of just Bill Gates giving $1 billion, Microsoft could also give $1 billion. That's bad too. But all I'm saying is a lot of our problems stem from something before that. So why am I even talking to you about this or trying to explain the law? It's not just because I feel like I like to talk about the law, although I do spend a lot of my time doing that. But I'm doing that because I think that it helps us understand how tricky of a problem this is to try to solve, if we try to solve it here in Illinois. So look, I will tell you, we're far away from any sort of reasonable limit on it in Illinois, but you can imagine if all we were trying to do is limit contributions, it wouldn't solve the problem, right? Because the billionaire could still come in and run. So just to get to where the state of the law is in Illinois, until 2011, there were no campaign finance limits in Illinois. I don't know how many of you are aware of that. No limits whatsoever. And so now there are limits, and they change depending on whether you're giving to an individual or a PAC or so on. But I'm going to focus on just in terms of for candidates. Like if you're going to contribute to a candidate, what are the limits? And the limits are $5,600 for an individual. It's a lot of money. $11,500 for corporations who want to give to a candidate, and $55,400 for PACs. I have no idea why the limits are higher for corporations and higher for PACs. You would have to ask your elected representatives why they decided to make it that way. But what it does mean is that corporations and PACs can often have an undue influence in donating money to a candidate. Another thing that is not limited is the donations of a political party to a candidate. So, for example, a lot of people have been critical of the Democratic Party of Illinois and its chairman at times, and that individual can give unlimited amounts of money to a candidate. So, why that is, I don't know either. But all I'm trying to explain to you is that the system, as it's set up, has these differing amounts. They don't make to me, as somebody who's not informed in how that came into being in 2011, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me when I was an outsider coming into the process why the limits were that. But here's another trick or issue or a little feature of the system. So there's this, one of the concerns that was raised by politicians when this system went in place in 2011 is, what if you're going up against, let's say, J.B. Pritzker, and he's a very rich man, and he's going to spend $1 billion or $150 million or whatever he ended up spending. How do you compete if you can only raise money $5,600 at a time? So the argument was made that once you hit a certain cap, and it changes based on the race. I know when I was running for Attorney General, it was $200,000 or $250,000. If you, a candidate in a race, spend that amount of money on your own race, you donate it to your own race, it blows the caps for everyone. Okay, and that rule kind of makes sense in a way, because you're like, okay, I get it. If I'm going up against JB or Bruce Rauner, and Bruce Rauner puts in $10 million, I should have the ability to try to find my own millionaires to counter him. The issue is that literally you could go to the bank, borrow $250K on your home, put it into your bank account as a loan to yourself, and you could take that money out later, right? You get the money back, but it busts the caps for the entire race, and you can find your billionaire friends who put money in. I will just tell you, when I ran for Attorney General, one of my candidates got $1 million from one guy. Okay, he busted the caps by getting money from him and his dad, because it also covers family members, and he put that money in to bust the caps and then got $1 million from one person like a week before the election. He didn't win, and look, and just to be clear, I as a Democrat, I supported the candidate who did win, Kwame Raoul. I'm on the transition committee, and I'm glad that he defeated Erica Harold. This isn't about my race, but I'm using it as an example to show you how the system can be gamed. He didn't matter, the guy who ended up doing that, but the point was that that's not the sort of system I think we want to have. So, how do we reform that system? We can have a conversation about it, because I'm not here to preach to you how we reform the system. Okay, I'm just here to explain to you and to start a conversation about it. But I will talk to you a little bit about one idea that is out there that has been getting a lot of discussion, okay? And it's called small donor matching. It's an idea that is already in place in New York City, and it was proposed by the House Democrats as part of their first bill that they introduced in the new session. It's called H.R. 1. For those of you who do listen to my podcast, I had an episode where I brought in a congressman and a man who litigates campaign finance and gerrymandering cases in the Supreme Court to discuss H.R. 1. But essentially, H.R. 1 says that if you raise the amount of money that's below a certain level, I think it's $600 in the House bill, but it doesn't really matter. It could be $100, it could be $500, it can be $50, whatever. Anything below that amount gets matched from the public, essentially, 6-1. And so what it does is, it makes it and incentivizes people who are trying to raise money on smaller dollar donations. When I ran for Attorney General, most of my donations were under $100, under $50. They were small over the internet. People would give a little bit. The idea is that would get magnified, and it would counterbalance it to an extent. Does it eliminate the problem? No. But the reason that it is a solution that people propose in the House of Representatives and in New York, and by the way, in 2015, there was a referendum in Chicago, an advisory referendum, and it got 79% of the vote, voted for a small donor matching proposal. Why it's gotten broad support and why it's proposed is because it's constitutional. So when we go back to these decisions that I told you about, as part of the reason I wanted to explain the law to you, is it's unconstitutional. I'm putting that in air quotes because I don't necessarily agree with this view of the Constitution. But according to the United States Supreme Court, it will be unconstitutional for us to say that Bruce Rauner couldn't give more than $1,000 to his own campaign, or to spend $1,000 of his money attacking Kwame Raoul or J.B. Pritzker or whatever he wanted to do with it. But we could say, well, you know what? If Joe Blow or Jane Doe gives $5, we're going to use our own public money because we're just putting money into the system. We're not telling anybody they can't speak. We're just adding more speech, so to speak. There have been other proposals that I would say are more ambitious, that I think are even better, but they're not getting as much traction, which would give everybody in the state like $100 or $50 of money that has to be donated to a campaign or cause. And what I like about that is it really, this way, instead of having to beg people for, one thing I hated about politics, you're begging people for $10 that they may not have. So this way you're giving people money that they don't have already, that everybody can put to any cause or to any candidate that they want. That I think is a very good proposal because it adds a lot of speech into the system, and it's not that expensive when you consider all the other things we spend our money on. We're probably far away from any of those things, but I do think that there's some real, there's a real push for small donor matching in Illinois. And one of the things I did before I came out here is I contacted some of the groups that are working on it, spent some time talking to them, and I'm like, is there anyone working on this in DeKalb County? And the answer is, oh, no, I don't think so. But Reclaim Chicago is working on it because I live in Chicago. Reform for Illinois, which used to be ICPR, is working on it, and they're supposed to be statewide, but they told me they didn't really know if they had anybody in your county that's working on it. But it's the sort of thing that maybe we could try to work on. But there may be other ideas you have. I'm not trying to. I don't own this idea, but it's something that we should be talking about. All right. So that's one issue I wanted to sort of tee up and throw out to you. Another one that I think we need to talk about is the ease of voting and how we vote. Okay. So this is something that is, I think, a core issue for a lot of folks, and it's an issue that was felt here in DeKalb County, right? So before I came out here, I spent a while talking to some of the people who helped me organize this event, and they talked about the long lines that we had in this room. This was a voting place in this room, and a lot of students at NIU who were excited. Oh.
Just so that as you start this topic,
Yeah.
If I could,
Sure.
I mentioned before that Carolyn and Liliana, myself, and some others were here, just so you have the lay of the land. The students were all the way down the hall and all the way down the stairs at one point, waiting to vote. When I got here, it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and these guys were already here ahead of me, and we sat and we made sure that the students, knew that we were there to help them. What they didn't know, and this becomes really important in a minute, is that we were Democrats because we were so close to this room. We didn't want to be within the 1,000 feet. So what we did is we made sure, with the help of Scott McAdams and Jim Lupke, we made sure that they had pizza and water. We didn't tell them we were Democrats, remember this. The pizza and the water kept coming. They also arranged for rides to and from other polling places, because the students, a lot of them, wanted to register and vote on the same day. Now, I called the county clerk, and in our county, on election day, we had 1,519 brand new voters, okay? Then, and I can't tell you how many are students, but I can tell you the areas where students predominantly live. In this room, 355 new voters in this room. In precinct 2 was another 118, and in precincts 4 and 5 was 192. That is 665 voters. More than a third of the vote was impacted by students. And in the past, we have not had students that voted. So they felt very passionate about this. And toward the end, we had more people wanting to give rides than we had students wanting to take the rides because the other areas filled up. The other thing that I took Renato on was a little tour that I mentioned. If you could come up these stairs right here, that was fine. You could come right here, no problem. And a lot of students did. But the elevator that's right here doesn't work. It's not ADA accessible. So if you came in over here, you parked it behind Campus Life, and you managed to get all the way over here, you had to walk through the building all the way over by to the desk where the hotel is, right? Take those elevators up a floor, and there's a tiny little sign that says Heritage Room. Once you got off of it, you had to snake your way back through the entire building to get to this room. It is not handicap accessible, and it is daunting. Even those of us that are able-bodied, it's daunting. You don't know where it is. You guys probably had a problem getting here too, and that's why I thanked you when we first came in. It is an issue. Now, our county clerk, he thought it was fine. Do you know they ran out of ballots? The kids, part of that wait was because there weren't enough ballots. So I wanted to preface what Renato is about to say with what actually happened in this room on election day. And again, I want to thank the other people who came and helped, Liliana and Carolyn and Court and Scott and Jim. I mean, we all, and Carol too. Yes, Carol was here. Did I miss anybody? Josh. Oh, and Josh, yes. There's Josh, way back there. Sorry, couldn't see you, you're hiding. I want to thank them all because I do not think we would have had these numbers if it had not been for the group of us that took off our Democratic hat and made sure that good voting happened. So if you want to give these guys a round of applause, please feel free to.
Well, that explains, I think, the problem, or with the potential problem, better than I ever could, right? Which is that even if you technically have the right to vote, that right can be better or worse or more limited or more accessible depending on where you live and who you are and so forth. It's a bigger problem, it's a problem here, it's a bigger problem in some states where there appears to have been at least some efforts to close polling stations and to restrict voting based upon different areas that might be whether you're a minority or somebody who just would be a Democrat. You know, for example, my former law school classmate ran for governor of Georgia, Stacey Abrams. You know, she made a lot of serious allegations about voting places that were closed in Georgia. The typical African American voter had to go a lot further to vote than a typical white voter in Georgia. So, you know, and you may think, well, why is that, or why does that even matter? I think you just explained it a moment ago. If you're, somebody who has a very easy time voting, you're going to be more likely to vote. I mean, that's just the way reality is. You know, I'm sure a lot of us go to you might go for coffee at a certain place because it's 100 feet closer than the next one, right? We go to the gas station that's closest to our house, maybe, even if it's 2 cents, more expensive. And I think that sort of thing matters. We want more voting. This is a nonpartisan issue. As you could tell, as I've tried to discuss this, really, we got to have a room of Republicans here, and they should be concerned about the same things, or at least that, which is getting more people to vote and having a more fair system. This is not a partisan issue. It's an issue that we should, as Democrats, we want people to vote, right? So how does this happen? I mean, how do we have a situation where we've got lines out the wazoo, a non-ADA compliant area, not enough ballots? I will say one structural issue, and this is going to be me in my explainer mode again, to the extent that's helpful, just as a starting point to get the discussion going, is one thing that people don't completely understand is that our elections are run at a local level. Like, why is it that for even a federal election, like we've got this local clerk who has this undue influence in how voting is done in DeKalb County? Like, we don't do that for a lot of other things. It's not like our interstate highway system is dependent on what the clerk of DeKalb County thinks. Mm-hmm. But that's the reality of how our voting system works. And so certain areas that have a lot of money and resources, or whatever, they have advantages that other areas don't. You might have an area that's underserved or has a poor clerk who just doesn't have their act together. And it's also a state-by-state thing. So, on some of the issues I've talked about, I'm going to talk about a little later in the conversation before I throw it to you. We have in Illinois some very bad statewide systems that were compromised, and it's just because it's a state we didn't have our crap together, and other states did. So, why do I bring this up with voting? Is because there's some movements that are underway in Springfield that I want to draw your attention to. I'm not really saying whether they're good or bad. I'm just noting it. There's a lot of talk about having more centralization to voting. Okay, a lot of the people who are the administrators, when I talk to folks in some of these reform organizations, I'm like, okay, what issues are you seeing out there? I did that before I even came out here. That was one issue. Well, everyone's talking about trying to centralize voting is more efficient, yada, yada, yada. The downside is what they're talking about is having less voting locations, but bigger ones. Well, what that could mean is going to be a problem for if you're a senior, or if you don't have a car, how do you get to your voting place, right? They're talking about moving much more to a vote-by-mail system and have, in-person voting as a second choice. For younger voters, that can be more appealing. A lot of them don't. I'm a little older than I look. I'm 42, but people who are millennials, they may not feel the affinity to voting in person like most of us do. I think probably who've been voting in person for a long time. But for a lot of us, we're used to and we want to vote in person. We don't want to just throw our vote in the mail. So those efforts are underway. But I will just say that one of our challenges, if it's not centralized, is how do we police local clerks, and how do we ensure that we have a certain quality to voting in this state, so that this way, it doesn't matter what county you live in or what precinct you're in, that you're able to have the same access to voting. So one bill that you may not be aware of, or initiative from the last section that got passed, something called the Voter Equipment Modernization Project. So that was a project that essentially requires counties like this one to report the state of their equipment. Often there's a poor state of equipment in a lot of counties, and the idea is to catch our most vulnerable spots. And it's a good start, but there's a heck of, I mean, that's just a reporting requirement, right? And so what would be, at a first blush to me, what makes a lot of sense is to have standards for counties, but that may also require some state funding, because there's just not an equal amount of funds available in every county to make voting accessible to folks. The problem, of course, is we also have a fiscal problem that I know they're trying to solve down in Springfield. So that's another topic, and now I'm going to go to one last topic before I throw it out to everybody, but I think it relates, okay? One thing that I think some of you are aware of, but probably not enough of you are aware of, is that our voting systems in Illinois were penetrated by the Russians during the 2016 election. Some of you know about it. It's an issue that I talk a lot about. I feel like the only person who talks about it, certainly the only person who is involved in Illinois politics who talks a lot about it. But I think it's concerning and alarming to me. Robert Mueller, in one of his indictments, talked about a state that had approximately 500,000 voters' records that were stolen by these Russian intelligence operatives, and included names, addresses, partial social security numbers, dates of birth, etc., phone numbers, etc. So, and then the Illinois State Board of Elections indicated that that state is the state of Illinois. So it's something that, I did some press conferences, and to Kwame's credit, he went around with me, we did press conferences and pledged to do something about it. And I'm very hopeful that his office will investigate it. But that's backward looking, okay? That's like, okay, let's investigate what they did years ago. But now we got to think going forward. We've got a state board of election system that's not secure. We have a lot of part of the goal of the modernization project was to see kind of our state and local standards. A lot of our equipment is not necessarily secure, and we do have, many of our counties use paper ballots, but there's some.
We do. Just put your mind at ease.
Yeah.
We are not electric here. We are on paper ballots, and so we did not fall into that. And that's one of the things you mentioned, that they're trying to fix that problem.
Mm-hmm.
But if you fix it and you centralize it, then is it more breachable? So here in DeKalb County, to our credit, we have paper ballots.
Well, in some ways, yeah. One thing, I've talked to some IT experts, and one thing they've said is, in many ways, older technology is better. It's harder to hack. Certainly, paper ballots. To me, the way I view it is, at the very minimum, I want the same level of security that I have when I deposit money in a bank. In other words, when I deposit my money in my checking account, I go to the bank. It all is done electronically. There's a computer system, but I get a paper receipt that the bank has a copy of, and I got a copy of it, and it says I deposited $2,200 or $3 or whatever the amount is, and I know I got that, and I know that they have a paper copy. And when I was a federal prosecutor and I subpoenaed those banks, I could get the paper copies, right, in addition to the electronic records. And sometimes I would want them because the person would fill it out, or there would be some reason. So at least there has to be a paper trail for every ballot, and then to my mind there needs to be auditing of those. So we use a sample, because it take a lot of time to count or to compare 30 million or however many votes there might be, 10 million, whatever, 5 million. But if you do a 1% of them and you see if there's an anomaly or not, you do a random sampling of 1%, then that can enable you to check. If you're checking the paper versus the electronic, you can see if there's any irregularities, and then go to larger and larger samples from there as necessary. That is something, by the way, that it's a problem for the state. What the breach that I'm talking about was actually at the statewide level, at the State Board of Elections. They were stealing voter data. But one thing you can imagine, could you imagine if, and when I talked to General Doug Lute, who is was our representative to NATO about this problem. what they're concerned about is not that necessarily the votes would get changed by a foreign adversary, but that let's say our election data got erased, you could have pandemonium and a loss of faith in the system, and which is a lot of times what a foreign adversary may want to do. They deleted our voter data, and you went to your voting place, and you couldn't vote because they're like, well, we don't have any record of you, or they mess up all the data, so you have the wrong addresses or the wrong name, or whatever it may be. That could be a humongous problem that would just screw up our entire election day and might require a redo or something like that. All I'm saying is, this is a problem that is going to require some funding. There's been a number of folks in the Democratic House caucus have introduced in the last Congress bills on this to get more funding for states. Mike Quigley, I know, was one of the sponsors of that legislation. That went nowhere, obviously, because we had Republicans in control in the last Congress. It'll be interesting to see if they can get any bipartisanship in this Congress. I'm not holding my breath. So here at home, we have to think about what we can do, even if it's only at a county level, to ensure that we have security. And to me, it's an issue that isn't really about necessarily, there's somebody who's going to call. Whether the Russians come or not, or anybody, the point is we want voters to feel and be secure in their vote, that their vote can't be tampered with. As I've gone around, whether it's online or offline, not just in Illinois, I've been all over Illinois, to literally from Cairo up to the northern tips of Illinois. People are concerned that their vote didn't count. And I don't necessarily agree with, I don't have any evidence, I don't say I disagree, but I don't have evidence to support any of their concerns about their votes getting changed. But we don't want people feeling that way. We want people to feel that their vote is secure. So to me, it's just an issue that I think is important to make sure that people have trust in the process. So those are, to me, the issues that I think are important for all of us as Democrats to work on. And I think this is a good time for it because they're not sexy issues. But now that we've had our victory dance and we had our party and all that, it's time to now think about how we can make the system better for the long term. So, okay, so how about you first, and then just because you already spoke.
All right. So for the small donor matching program, I've got a couple of questions about that. I assume this is by public, matching by the public.
Right.
Do you have a feel for what that would cost in the state of Illinois?
I don't, and I think it would depend on the proposal.
So they can understand.
Sure, let me repeat the question. Hopefully I'm loud enough that everyone can hear me.